Chapter 1. The Manor with Too Many Diaries. A drizzly Thursday cloaked. Devon, as Inspector Harold Greaves, arrived at Hawthorne Manor. A sprawling, ivy-draped estate, nestled between rolling fields and forgotten woods, was the pride of the Langford family. Its turrets and tall windows spoke of grandeur faded by time. The house now creaking with secrets outnumbering its servants. The drawing room gleamed with polished mahogany, velvet drapes, and oil paintings that seemed to watch too closely, the air heavy with lavender and old ink. Lady Frances Langford, the estate's formidable matriarch, sat with rigid poise, her sharp tongue a match for her steely spine. Around her, guests gathered for a literary retreat, writers, editors, critics, invited to spend 5 days revising and reflecting, but plans, like old houses, crumbled under the weight of hidden tensions. Major Bernard Cray, a war memoirist, poked at the fire, his pipe clenched tight. Across from him, Judith Peel, a columnist of biting repute, scribbled in a red leather notebook. By the French windows, Miles Dalrymple, a pale young man with round spectacles, stared at the rain, nervously tapping his pen. How many diaries? Do you suppose this house is held? Judith mused, breaking the silence. Places like these absorb secrets. Lady Frances sniffed. A great many. Some are better left unread. Her words lingered, heavy with unspoken meaning. That evening, the guests dined at a long oak table beneath a chandelier that clicked as if recalling forgotten truths. Conversation faltered. Major Cray's brash tales of foreign exploits rang hollow. Miles pushed potatoes around his plate in silence. Judith's probing questions about the late Lord Langford's political dealings met icy rebuffs. Lady Frances, cryptic, announced she'd retire early, promising answers tomorrow. Answers to what? No one dared ask. Morning brought chaos. Miles, an early riser, sat in the breakfast room by 6:30, notebook open, tea cooling. Something nagged at him: Lady Frances's odd remark, Judith's diary obsession, or the manor's oppressive quiet. Then a scream tore through the west wing, raw and desperate. Guests and staff raced to Lady Frances's private study. The door, unlocked, swung open under their collective gaze. There, slumped across her antique desk, lay Lady Frances Langford. Her teacup had spilled, staining handwritten pages, her pen still clutched in a trembling hand. The fire was cold, her skin paler, her eyes frozen in surprise. Dead, beside her, a diary lay open, its pages soaked. Every inked word vanished as if erased by the night. Inspector Greaves was summoned at once, but it would take more than local knowledge and protocol to make sense of what had happened. By mid-afternoon, a telegram had been sent to a small, pristine apartment in London, where a certain Belgian detective lived, surrounded by symmetry, warmth, and order. By nightfall, Hercule Poirot had boarded a train to Devon. He brought with him nothing more than a suitcase, a silver-tipped cane, and his little gray cells. The ink had vanished. The woman was deadened. The manor had just become a puzzle box chapter to the death behind the locked door. Hercule Poirot arrived at Hawthorne Manor precisely at 11 o'clock the following morning. The rain had not ceased since dawn, and the countryside seemed wrapped in a permanent gray mist pool. Dressed impeccably in a navy wool coat and bowler hat, stepped down from tired car with his usual precision. Not so much as a splash of mud touched his polished shoes. Inspector Greaves was waiting for him at the entrance, hat in hand, face already showing the strain of a case spiraling beyond his depth. "Mupo," he said with a nod. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Poirot returned the nod with polite formality. "Of course, murder does not wait, Inspector." And the ink, it has truly vanished completely. Greaves replied, letting him into the house. The diary was open, every page soaked, but there's not a trace of writing, as if someone scrubbed it all clean. Poole lifted an eyebrow, curious intensity in the study. "We've kept it untouched, As you requested, they passed through the dim hallways of the manor. Poirot took in every detail. The polished floor scuffed faintly at the edges, the painting slightly askew above the umbrella stand, the faint scent of rosewood, polish and damp wool. Every home had its story. This one was already whispering inside Lady Frances's private study. The air had grown cold, fireplace was unlit, and a fine layer of ash had settled on the hearth. Poirot approached the desk, slow, lithe. Kua remained in the same position described in the report. Lady Frances Langford, elegant, even in death, leaned over the blotting pad. Her eyes were now closed, thanks to the respectful hands of the maid, but her final expression linked in the room. Something between surprise and indignation. She was writing when she died? Poirot asked. Yes, we believe so, said Greaves, but we can't tell what she wrote. The diary was drenched, and by the time we discovered it, the ink was gone. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. The door was closed, but not locked from the inside. No one saw or heard anything unusual. Poirot turned to the desk. May I? Of course. He leaned in with delicacy, his eyes narrowing at the soaked diary, now stiff from drying with gloved fingers. He turned the pages blank, utterly blank, yet the faint grooves of handwriting remained if one tilted the page toward the light. Poirot whispered, but the ghost of the word still lingers. Opened his pocket magnifying glass and peered closely at the indentations. She wrote with a firm hand. He murmured, "This is not the work of someone in distress. The lines are smooth, deliberate, no smudges, no hesitations." Poirot glanced at the silver fountain pen lying nearby. It was uncapped, still damp at the nib. The ink bottle, however, sat neatly on a tray, cork sealed. Curious indeed, he said. The ink is missing from the paper, but not the pen. Greaves frowned. Are you saying think was removed intentionally? Poole looked at him. I say only what I observe. Monima tell me who discovered the body. Miles Dalrymple. One of the guests claimed heard a scream and rushed to the room, and the others, they followed. Judith Peel, Bernard Cray, the housemaid, Lydia, and the cook, all confirmed the timing. No one admits to seeing or hearing anything suspicious before the scream. Very well, Rose said softly. Then it is time I met him. The drawing room now served as a waiting area for those left behind, a group more anxious than grief-stricken Judith. Peel looked irritated, tapping her pen furiously against her notebook. Major Cray was pacing by the fire, muttering about nonsense, and Delay Smiles' Dalrymple, pale as paper, was perched on the edge of a chair, hands trembling. Poirot entered silently, but with undeniable presence. The room stilled. Madame Zachar, he said, gently, permit me, am Errol Poirot. I've come to understand what has happened here and why. They stared at him, not rudely, but cautiously, like people unsure whether they were being judged or rescued. I would like to speak to each of you in turn, Paul continued. You will forgive me if my questions are, how do you say intrusively? It is necessary. Lady Frances is dead. Her final thoughts are lost in vanishing ink, and someone in this house knows why there was silence. Then Judith pierced it abruptly. I'll go first, she said. I hate waiting. Poirot smiled. Tribune. Let us begin with you, mademoiselle. Their conversation was clipped and sharp. Judith denied knowing anything, but slipped when asked about the contents of the diaries Lady Frances supposedly kept. She was obsessed with control. Judith said she wrote everything down. Everyone's secrets was so she claimed. Poole made a quiet note. Next came Miles. His nerves were barely held together. He admitted he admired Lady Frances, even feared her slightly. He also confirmed that the study was often locked, but not that morning. I thought it strange, he whispered, that it wasn't locked. Did she always write in that diary? Poirot asked. Miles nodded. Every night, like clockwork. And finally, Major Cray, gruff, red-faced, and impatient. I didn't kill her, if that's what you're sniffing. After Hesnopped, Poole merely tilted his head. I ask no such thing, only the truth. You were in the war? Yes. You know how to keep secrets, Craig scowled. I know how to keep people alive. Poirot made no reply, but in his mind, pieces had begun to mouver vanished. Message: a woman writing secrets before her death, a house filled with authors, each expert at crafting fiction, but someone, Poirot thought, had committed the ultimate act of storytelling, a murder written in ink and than in Race Chapter 3. The pen that wrote without witness the following morning. The manor was heavy with unease. The rain had stopped, but mist still clung stubbornly to the windows, blurring the outside world as if the house itself wanted to forget. What had happened at breakfast was subdued. Even Major Cray had abandoned Eddie's usual complaints about the bacon pool. However, was already up meticulously seated in the library with a pot of hot chocolate and the morning paper folded beside him. Hastings was not with him this time. This was one of the rare cases where Pua had traveled alone. Not that he minded, his mind was sharpest in solitude in this mystery. He knew required nothing less than perfection as Bert Greaves entered, carrying a tray of items we gathered what we could from Lady Frances's study. He stayed, setting the tray down: her pen, her ink bottle, the blotting paper, and a torn envelope we found in the fireplace. Half-burned, Poirot's eyes gleamed mercifully. Let us examine. He picked up the pen for a silver casing, slightly tarnished at the nib. When he held it to the light, glistened faintly. Poirot unscrewed the barrel and sniffed faintly metallic enough scent of ordinary ink poison. Greaves asked. No, Poirot replied. Some thingles. We must send it for chemical analysis. But I suspect an ink substitutomating unstable. He next uncorked the bottle. Inside, the liquid looked normal. Dark blue, like any writing ink, but Poirot swirled it and held it to the light. No sediment, he said thoughtfully, but too thin ink should cling. He dipped a fresh sheet into the bottle and scribbled a few neat words. Hercule Poirot. Here, they waited. Within seconds, the ink began to fade. It didn't vanish entirely, but thinned as if dissolving into the page. Greaves exhaled invisible ink. Poirot smiled. Something of that nature. There are inks that fade upon exposure, radon, air or heat, or even ultraviolet light, but Lady Frances would not choose such a opinion by accident. This ink was planted where the pen was tampered with. He turned tough blotting paper, pressing it lightly. He could make out the impressions from the final page of Lady Frances's diary. Our grooves here, look. He adjusted his magnifying glass and began to trace indentations with his finger. Greaves leaned closer. Can you read it? Some of it, Poirot replied. It appears she was writing about what I saw in the mirror and not who expected, followed by something about the pages from the red diary missing. Again Greaves looked puzzled. Red diary? There was only one, perhaps, said Poirot, because of Somio made sure that he stood and walked to the fireplace where the half-burned envelope had been retrieved with careful fingers. He unfolded it. The address had been nearly destroyed, but Anna was legible. Mr. T. Harav, and part of a return address from London. A solicitor, Poirot said, likely involved with Lady Frances's estate. She did mention something about changing her will a few days ago. Greaves added Pugov. A low hum. Then we must find out to whom she was writing and what she intended to change by mid-morning. Kira was ready to return to the scene of the crime. This time he studied not the body or the desk, but the details, the alignment of the chair, the fireplace, the half-drawn curtains. Hanatist. Something peculiar. The clock on the mantelpiece had stopped at 9:47. He pointed to it. Who would win this? The maid, Lydia Poirot, sent for her. A timid girl in her 20s arrived, nervously wringing her hands in her apron. You wound the clock daily, Pooh? Asked. Yes, sir, every morning at 8. And yesterday? I didn't get to it before she was found, sir. Nodded. You're certain? Yes, sir. I always do it at the same time. Then this clock stopped during Lady Frances's final hour. Lydia's hands tightened, sir, if it helps. I saw her light still on at 4 to 10. The night before. Poirot looked sharply at Here you are. Sure, yes, I was passing with fresh linen then. The time of death. is consistent, but there's more. He glanced again at the fireplace picks. Hector, do you see there are 3 logs, 2 blackened, 1 fresh? Smooney attempted to burn something quickly, likely in haste. The envelope is only half gone, but what else? He crouched low and examined the ash. Something caught his eye. Small metallic glint. He reached for his tweezers and carefully lifted it. It was the corner of a photograph, barely larger than a postage stamp. The edges had curled in the heat, but the corner showed the edge of a shoe and part of a floorboard's a mean, burned picture. Poirot said softly, but not completely. That afternoon, Poirot requested a tour of the manor led by Lydia and accompanied by Inspector Greaves. He moved from room to room, taking note of where each guest was sleeping, how the corridors connected, and most importantly, how easy it would be. 2 acts. The study, unnoticed, he lingered longest at the writing room, a side chamber where guests had been, leaving their personal notebooks and essays. Poirot's fingers hovered over aired, leather-bound journal, sitting quietly on the corner of the table. Not Lady Frances's, but Judith Peel's inspector, he said. Observe, this is the same size McKean binding as the diary found at the scene, only this one is intact. Greaves looked at him. You think someone replaced it? Perhaps not replaced, switched. Perhaps the line hidden. There were pages missing, the maid said. Poirot leaned in, whispering galmist to himself. In this house of writers, the pen is mightier than the sword, but when it writes lies and Thoughtless vanish overnight, the murderer thinks themselves clever. He looked up it. They forget. Poole never forgets what others overlook. Chapter for the red diary. That wasn't hers. The wind had begun to rattle the upper windows of Hawthorne Manor by the time Poirot scad for a quiet moment in the drawing room. He stood at the window, gazing out at the long gravel driveway, the garden statue shelf obscured by creeping fog behind him. The room was still, its bookshelves packed with history fiction and what he privately called emotional clutter. The sort of volumes people displayed to impress, not to understand. In the table before him sat 2 red leather-bound books. One, retrieved from Lady Frances's study, was still damp and ghostly blank. The mysterious diary whose ink had disappeared. The other, thinner and undisturbed, had been found in Thor's writing room with Judith Peel's name discreetly embossed in gold lettering. At a glance, they were identical to identical. Poole ran his gloved fingers across the spines, the grain of the leather, the trim of the edges, the paperweight. Everything matched, saved for one tiny detail. The corners of Lady Frances's diary were sharper. Newer Judith's bore the wear of use, small creases where it had opened and closed 100 times. This Poirot knew was not coincidence. He turned slowly as Inspector Greaves entered. I have had word from the solicitor, Mr. Hercule Greaves, said he. Confirmed. Lady Frances had requested an urgent revision to her. Well, she intended to cut one of the original beneficiaries out completely. Did he say him? Poole asked. No, she never named him, only that the change must be made before the end of the week. Poirot steepled his fingers, and she did not live to see that day. He gestured toward the twin diaries. You see, mon ami, the confusion. One's deliberate. 2 diaries, one with truths, one without. The one she used on the night of her death has been edited. Hey, you think it's Judith Peel's diary? I think it is someone else's entirely, but it was swapped most cleverly with Lady Frances's original, a clean copy, a decoy. Greaves looked troubled. And the real loan gone, Poirot replied. Or hidden, but not destroyed, I think. A killer horror moves. Words from paper values. Was written far too much to truly burn it later. That day Poirot requested Anna Thorne to view, this time with Lydia the maid. She was hesitant, but Poirot's voice was gentle, coaxing. You said you saw the light on in Lady Frances's study that night. Tell me, did you notice anything else? Any sounds? Footsteps? Open doors? Lydia swallowed. I thought I'd heard voices to people, but I didn't linger. It wasn't me. Kay, please. And you didn't mention this before, because if I'm wrong, he might get someone in trouble. And if I'm right, I might be next. Poole tilted his head. Mademoiselle, fear is understandable, but justice, true justice, protects the innocent and unmasks the guilty. Tell me what you remember. Lydia bit her lip. I'm sure I heard Judith's voice, low and sharp, the kind of voice you whisper with when you don't want to be overheard, and Lady Frances said something about what's been taken. Poole nodded slowly. Mercy, that is most helpful. That evening, Poirot paid a private visit to Judith Peel. In her guest room, she was seated at the vanitier, moving her makeup with sharp, swift movements. Back again, Miss Poirot. Schist, catching his reflection in the mirror. Planning to accuse me of something? Not yet, Poirot replied, stepping into the room. I am only interested in the truth and in your writing. She narrowed her eyes. What about it? Approached the writing desk, May. Judith shrugged. He opened her notebook. This one, the red diary, but her personal journal of essays and opinions. Handwriting was swift, pointed, elegant to Poirot. Flipped through a few pages, then stopped. You write with black ink, of course, but the red diary found downstairs. It was written in blue. Judith's brow furrowed slightly. I suppose so, but simply this. It is not your diary, and yet it was in the writing room under your name. She stared at him too long. Poirot continued softly. Lady Frances's diary, the one she wrote the night she died, is missing. In its place is a blank book. Identical in every detail, identical, except for where the one we found has no use to it. No writing impressions, no weight of memory. Judith stood abruptly. I don't know what you're talking about, but you do. Mademoiselle Abbesse, you are the only person here who has reason to care what Lady Frances wrote. You are the only one who publishes truth for a living and buries it when not. Inconvenient. Judith's voice dropped to a whisper. You think? I killed her, you think, Poirot said slowly. You feared what she had written, and perhaps you were not alone in that fear. As the door shut behind him, Poirot lingered in the hall. He did not believe Judith was the killer, at least not alone. Was clever, yes, ruthless with the pen, but this crime had the feel of orchestration. Someone who knew how to replace diaries, how to forge handwriting, and how to make ink disappear. He turned toward the darkened corridor leading to Miles Dalrymple's room. A man of nervous habits, a man who claimed to idolize Lady Frances, and a man with a background in chemical experimentation is noted in his biography. Poole's steps were silent as he moved through the fog, slicked hallway in his room. Miles was scribbling furiously, unaware that the storm of truth was already forming outside his door. Chapter 5. The chemist who feared the mirror. Miles Dalrymple's guest room was this malaced in Hawthorne Manor, a narrow chamber at the end of the east corridor with a slanted ceiling, a single wardrobe beam, writing desk wedged against the window like a shy confession. The paintsware fogged from within, and beside them sat Miles, hunched over a notebook, kissing stained fingers, twitching slightly. As he wrote, he did not hear Poirot enter Runtle. The door clicked softly shut. Your concentration, Massey, is admirable. Poolside. Miles jumped as if struck. Monsieur Poirot, I wasn't expecting. Few ever expect truth, monsieur, Poirot said gently. May I? Without waiting for permission, Poirot walked toward the desk. The notebook before Miles was filled with precise cursive writing entries in a personal diary, though not the red kind found elsewhere in the house. His ink was darkest line straight, his tone clinical. You record everything, Hussey Poole said, glancing at the page. Even your thoughts on Lady Frances. Miles flushed. I admired her. She was remarkable. Yes, remarkable, and I suspect deeply observant. Tell me, monsieur, do you always use the same ink? Miles nodded quickly. Of course. Parker Quink, permanent. Yet I found a bottle of ink on her desk that was quite the opposite. An ink that fades aside. Piers Poirot leaned slightly closer. You know of such things, do you not? Mellish hesitated. I studied chemistry at Cambridge. I dabbled a little early on with inks and compounds. Invisible ink was a child's trick, nothing serious. But for useful, no, I suppose. P's eyes narrowed. And is it useful for erasing the truth? To Miles turned pale. You think? I had something to do with Herdith, and think, P.O. said, pacing the room slowly, that you were afraid of what Lady Frances wrote in her diary, afraid she had seen something you could not explain perhaps. Something she saw in the mirror. Miles froze. Poirot stopped walking. You were nearby Thistity, were you not? Yes. I was in the breakfast room before that. Miles hesitated. I don't remember exactly. You don't. You were in the corridor. You saw the light in her study. You knew she was writing. Miles didn't answer. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. Poole lowered his voice. Lady Frances told someone that what she saw in the mirror was not who she expected. Mirrors, sure, do not leap at people do. In this mirror, the one above her desk, it faced the door. Poirot pointed. She saw someone enter, someone she did not expect. Miles's breathing grew uneven. You were the first to find the body, Poole continued, but you did not rush in at the screen, did you? You were already there. You discovered the body. You saw what she had written, and you panicked. You poured the fading ink over the pages or switched the diaries, perhaps. Both. Miles's voice cracked. I didn't kill Herno. I believe you. Miles looked up in shock. I believe you were frightened at Poirot said gently, but not of guilt, of exposure. Lady Frances knew something about you, something. You feared the others might learn something worth erasing. Miles slumped slightly. His shoulders sagged like wet parchment. She knew about the letter. Which letter? Miles swallowed one. I sent to the Royal Society years ago. It contained falsified lists. I never thought anyone would trace it back to me, but she found out. Shay always found out. Poirot nodded slowly, and she threatened to reveal it. No worse. He wrote about it. Sees in that red diary said that even the purest ink hides chemical lies. I knew what she meant. I begged her to remove it. She refused, said truth must out. And so you removed the diary. No, I only us. I saw her dead. I panicked. I didn't want that truth published, so I poured solvent into the ink bottle, enough to make it fade. I didn't expect her to die. I swear to you, I didn't kill her. Poole studied him closely. I believe you, Mr. Dalrymple. Your crime is one of fear, but someone else had committed the greater sin. After Miles had been escorted away by Inspector Greaves for a formal statement, Poirot remained in the guest room alone. He glanced at the window, at the fog curling at the corners. Chemist, afraid of exposure. A journalist, afraid of secrets. A soldier with a violent temper. A hospital changed her will days before her death, and somewhere among them, the truth waited patiently like ink drying on a page until it, too, vanished. Poole turned toward the hallway. There is still someone, he whispered to himself. Who knew the ink would disappear? He tapped his cane against the floor, and that someone knew exactly what. Lady Frances would write Chapter 6, The Fire That Burned Hoff, A Truth to Hearth, and Lady Frances's private study had gone cold, ash pallid, great fine and gray like forgotten snowfall, but Q saw it differently. To him, their minutes were not mere residue of heat. They were a crime scene, in miniature, an altar upon which someone had tried to secrete the truth. It was mid-morning, and the house was quieter than usual. The gusts, now suspects in all but name, had retreated into long silences, their doors more often closed than open. Judith Peel hadn't touched her notebook. Major Cray had abandoned his bluster, and Miles Dalrymple had all but vanished into his shame pool. However, was invigorated, kneeling beside the fireplace with deliberate care. He examined the ash one simmer. The photograph corner he'd previously found had been carefully stored, but now he sifted through what remained, seeking more grease. He called the inspector, hovering near the doorway, stepped inside. You have good boots? Yes, Poirot asked. Greaves blinked. I suppose. So then, come mon ami, help me search together. They began sifting through the ashes, using tongs and brushes. It didn't take long before Greaves exclaimed softly. He reached something stiff. He pulled a charred object from beneath a blackened log. It was a scrap of heavy paper, partializing, bearing the imprint of wax. A broken sealed. Poole leaned in awe. A page from a legal Document C, the watermark, and this faint line. Here it is. The header of Harav and Templeton, the law firm. Greaves' face tightened. She was burning her will. Puyo shook his head slowly. No, mon ami, someone else was. This page was burned hastily, incompletely, and under the cover of a roaring fire. It was not destruction. It was panic. He held up the scrap to the light. The ink here had not vanished, though it was faint from the flame. A few legible words remained, bequeathed to Judith Pill, the sum of, and beneath it only scorched fragments. Shuwas in the will. Greaves murmured. Poirot stood up, brushing ash from his gloves. Indeed, and likely she was about to be removed. Tayro found Judith in Telebris, standing by the tall windows with her arms crossed, staring out into the fog-covered garden. The light hit her fists, just enough to show the exhaustion beneath her poise. Judith, he said smoothly. She didn't turn. Did Miles tell you everything? Enough, Pooh said, to know he feared something personal. But fear does not kill Mademoiselle. Only intent. Does she turn then sharply? Do you think I killed her? I think you had motive, Pooh replied. An opportunity, but murder Mademoiselle? No, not yet. I think you were clever, but not clever enough, he proceeded. Singed paper and handed it to her. Her face palled, but she said nothing. Shuai is going to cut you from the will, Kiro said. And you knew it. Judith's lips tightened. She told me a week ago, said Kyo. I had become too reckless, that I used my pen like a dagger. She didn't want her name associated with mine, and so Yo confronted her. I did the night before her death. I begged her not to go through with it. She refused, called me a parasite on tragedy, said her money would do better elsewhere. Pooh nodded. So you took's page, you tried to burn it, hide your motive. Judith's voice lowered. I didn't kill her. Poirot then. Who did? I don't know. He studied her face. But you suspect he looked away. Cray. Maybe he hated her politics, or maybe even Lydia. She was more than a maid, more like a servant, bound by guilt. I don't know, but I didn't do it. Poirot watched her leave the library, her shoulders heavy with tension. Her words weren't rehearsed. They rang of frustration and regret, but something struck him then a thread. He hadn't pulled yet. He returned quickly to the study and examined the ink bottle once more. The cork had a slight ridge. A ridgetat didn't match its usual counterpart. This cork wasn't standard issue. It was replaced, and not by chance. Poirot uncorked it again, sniffed and then smiled faintly. Ah, a scent of vinegar and starched lemon juice. Invisibling's oldest trick. He turned to Greaves, now re-entering the room. The murderer is not only clever, they are theatrical. They wanted the disappearance of the ink tab part of the story. Why? Greaves asked. Why not just destroy the diary? Cause Poole said, this murderer does not merely want to erase, they want to rewrite. They want control over the story. He paused, lifting a finger, and that leads us not to the maid, not to the chemist, but to the only person here. Life has always depended on the manipulation of narrative. Greaves blinked. Judith. Poirot shook his head. No, Manami. Someone quieter. Samuel, who watches, edits, revises. Someone who never writes a word in front of others, and yet always has the final say. He turns slowly, his voice cold now. The murderer is among us, and they writeth, titting themselves. Chapter 7. The editor who crossed out. A life the editor had kept to the edges, though the retreat had gathered writers, critics, and one flamboyant soldier. It also included a man many had overlooked entirely. Edwin Stroud, the soft-spoken editor from Finch and Braxton, a mid-tier London publishing house known for its austere covers and tight contracts. Edwin had been introduced on the first day, had nodded politely at every meal, and had said very little since he neither challenged Judith's opinions nor flattered Major Craig's war memoirs. He rarely spoke at all, a quiet presence in a house now roaring with suspicion. Poole noticed this absence, noticed a gap, but as a signature in a gathering of egos and noise, silence. Whilst not absence, it was intent That afternoon, Poirot requested a private word with Edwin Stroud in the conservatory where sought classical music lad from a dusty gramophone in rainwater. Traced lines down the glass-like forgotten sentences. Edwin arrived wearing the summer charcoal cardigan and neatly pressed trousers. As every other day, his wire-framed glasses caught the light, scaring his small, tired eyes. "You asked for me, Miss Mesborough." "Yes, monsieur." "Please," said Edwin did, saw-smoothing his cuffs. "I understand." "Who began that you were Lady Frances Izetta in recent years?" "Yes, I handled the publication of her final memoirs reflections at Hawthorne. It performed quite well, and you visited often, occasionally. Reviewed her drafts. She trusted my judgment." Poirot tilted his head. "Did she entrust your discretion?" Edwin hesitated, then nodded. "I believe so." "Then tell me, Mer Stroud," Poirot said, voice soft as a whisper. "Did you edit her private diary as to?" Edwin blinked. "I'm not sure what you mean." Poirot leaned forward. "You see, you have learned something troubling. The ink in her diary was tampered with the trick of chemistry, but the act itself, that required access familiarity. It's a presence that went unnoticed. Who better than an editor? We someone permitted into private rooms, someone with knowledge of pens, offwards of final drafts." Edwin stiffened. "You're suggesting I suggest nothing. I ask. Only this did Lady Frances confide something to you, something she intended to make public?" Edwin looked away. Poirot watched him carefully. "Because she seems here. The pages were burned, the ink vanished, but the intention been them remains. I believe she planned to and publish something, a confession, a revelation." After a long pause, Edwin spoke, his voice low. "She told him she wanted to release a book of secrets, a final volume, not memoirs, not fiction truths, things she'd seen in politics, in her marriage, about people in this house. She said, 'It's time they answered for what they've done.'" Poole nodded. "And you?" "I warned her. I told her it would ruin reputations, that it would destroy careers. She said that waste the point. And so you tried to stop her." Edwin looked up sharply. "No, I respected her decision, but others didn't." She spoke of it too loudly. Judith overheard, so did Cray, even Miles. I think Poole was quiet for a moment, and when she died, I panicked. I thought someone would blame me. I tried to retrieve what I could. I searched her study after the police came. I even tried to find the manuscript draft, but it was gone. Poole nodded again. "She never wrote that book, did she?" "Only the diary." "Yes," Edwin whispered. "It was her map after." Edwin left. Poirot remained in the conservatory, sat perfectly still, fingers laced as the music finished with a crackle and fell into silence. The editor had not lied, and at least not fully, but he had hidden something, not knowledge of the ink, no, that had been Miles, not the burning of the will that was Judith, but Edwin's fingerprints were now on the room of the crime, in the silence before the death, and in the shadow afterwards. An editor does not write. He removes, refines, erases. Poole stood abruptly. He now had pieces, not all, but many, a chemist with a lie, a journalist with a motive, an editor with something to protect, and yet none of them had lifted the pen that killed Lady Frances, because yes, though no blood had spilled, no blade had been drawn. Poirot believed the murder had been executed by Ink, but not the invisible kind. No, the real weapon was a sentence 1 she had written, and someone else had read chapter 8, the sentence that could kill a reputation. By evening, the storm had fully passed the sky outside Hawthorne Manor, blushed with a muted sunset, its last rays casting long shadows. Across the drawing room where Hercule Poirot sat alone, a small leather-bound notebook in hand. It was not the diary, it was his own, crisp, symmetrical, filled with quiet deductions and fine French script. He was writing a single line. A lie may stain a page beautifully. The truth can erase a life. Lady Frances had written something, one sentence she now believed, that held more power than any fortune, more danger than any weapon. It was not merely that she kept secrets. No, she had revealed one ink with finality, and someone had read it before it vanished. The question was, what did she write? And to answer that, Pooh needed context and confession. Heckled for Lydia, the maid, once again. She arrived, slowly pale-faced, her hands tugging at the ends of her sleeves. The loss of her mistress had left more than grief in her. It had left fear. Please, she whispered. I don't know anything more. I've told you everything. Nor Mademoiselle, Poirot said softly. You have told me what you saw, but not what you suspected. Lydia's brow furrowed. You worked for Lady Frances for 5 years. You cleaned her rooms, you served her tea, you guarded her letters. Do not tell me you noticed nothing. Lydia looked down. Her voice trembled. There was one thing. Poirot leaned forward. She'd been receiving anonymous letters, all handwritten. She kept them in a drawer marked Unfinished Business. I found one once by mistake while dusting it. Said, if you write it, Tal, end it. That's all you told her. She was calm, said it was nonsense, but she locked the drawer after that. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And this drawer, is it still there? Lydia hesitated. I don't know. Take me in Lady Frances's private study. The fire had been cleaned out, but the atmosphere remained electric, like a performance paused mid-scene. Lydia led Kiro to the far side of the room, where a slim walnut cabinet sat beneath the windowsill. With trembling fingers, she unlocked it. Inside were a few notebooks, an ivory envelope, and one remaining letter torn at the top. Its writing, sharp and deliberate. Don't make me choose between silence and survival. Burned the pages. All of them, no signature, no return address. But Poirot saw at once what mattered. He turned the page over a faint watermark. Westminster. Hotel stationery. Poirot's eyes flashed Inspector Greaves. He called as the man entered the room. Send word to the Westminster Hotel in London. I required Agua's list from 1 week ago, and I need to know who among our suspects was staying there. Greaves narrowed his eyes. You'd think someone sent this from the hotel before arriving here. Pooh nodded. We and more. I think someone here feared that Lady Frances had discovered a truth too dangerous to publish, a truth involving one of them. He paused. And I think that truth is written in a sentence that has not yet been erased. Later that night, Poirot returned to the only person in the manor whose entire life revolved around appearances, Major Bernard Cray. He found him in the drawing room, polishing his cufflinks with absent precision, a brandy untouched by his side. Major, Poirot said calmly, your memoirs were quite the sensation. Cray glanced up. They did the job. Indeed, and in them you described a certain incident, June of '41, near Alexandria, a missing convoy, a decision made in the dark. Craig's teeth and Poole continued. You said you ordered the withdrawal to save your men. Bet records obtained by Lady Frances told another story, that you gave the order late, that dozens died, that you hesitated. Craig stood. You're accusing me of cowardice. Poirot stood too. I accuse you of killing a reputation, perhaps hers, perhaps your own. Craig's voice dropped a toe. Crowd, she threatened to reveal it. Said she'd written it down, said it wasn't time. Kai faced the truth, so you threatened her. Poirot said. I warned Herond. Then CRA's silence was louder than rage. I didn't kill her, he said. Finally. But if I'd found that sentence, I might have burned it. Pooh nodded slowly. And perhaps someone else did. The house was now a theater of closed doors and open possibilities. Lady Frances had written something devastating. Judith feared exposure. Miles feared shame. Edwin feared the fallout. Cray feared ruin, and one of them had read the sentence that stripped away the veil and chose to make it disappear. Chapter 9. The night the sentence was stolen. It was 11 when Tira turned to the study for the third time that day, the only room in Hawthorne Manor that refused to rest. The firewall slung out, the lights dimmed, but the room itself still hummed with invisibly tension, as though the very floorboards were holding their breath. He stood alone, gloved hands behind, his back staring once more at Lady Frances Langford's writing desk. Thiblot remained the empty pen, the blank diary, and above it all, the mirror, its frame, was ornate. Victorian, ringed in gold leaf, now dulled with age, but that glass, the glass, remained. Sharp and Poirot, ever precise, knew that glass, remember, shit is reflected, cannot be unseen, lady. Francis sat here, he whispered to himself. With her pen, she wrote, and then someone entered. He turned, placing himself exactly in the chair's position. From there, you could see the door, yes, but also just barrel-lithy hallway mirror on the opposite wall. He smiled. There are 2 mirrors in Thea's house that saw the crime, he murmured, and neither of them lies. The next morning, Poirot Coletta Verioni to the drawing room. No excuses, no delays. They gathered uncertain Judith-wise, her arms crossed. Miles, avoiding eye contact. Cray, glaring. Edwin, blinking, bend his glasses, and Lydia, trembling quietly. By the window, Poirot stood before the fireplace, arms behind his back. His tone was calm, clipped, utterly compass-like, a maestro before the final movement. Messy, he began. We are at the final act. He glanced at each one in turn. A woman is dead. Her final words have vanished, but they were not erased by time or chance. No, they were stolen, taken by one of you. He lifted the empty diary. This book was switched, the real one filled with her truths. Gone. Why? Because of one sentence. A sentence so dangerous, so unforgiving, that it had to be destroyed. Pooh pointed to Judith Yoford being written out of her will. And you were 2 miles. You feared the exposure of a scientific fraud, and she knew, too. Cray, you feared to disgrace a military lie, and she uncovered it. To Edwin, you feared the collapse of your literary world, and she intended to set it all light. And yet, Poirot paused. None of you are murderers. A breath passed through the room like wind through a flame pool, walked toward the desk, and picked up the red diary. The blank one. She died of cardiac arrest. Natural, yes, but triggered by shock. The doctor was clear. There was no poison, no sign. Olfactic, only one cause, a moment, so overwhelming it stopped her heart. He turned to the group. She read something, and that moment she saw it. The page, the truth. Poirot opened the diary, slowly flipped to the back cover. Inside was a tiny slit, barely visible where Simeon had hidden a second page, pressed flat between the stitching and the leather. He removed it carefully. It was water-stained, but intact. Poole cleared his throat and read aloud. I know who forget me husband's letters to the Prime Minister. It was Edwin Stroud. He sent them to gain favor, to move up in society. Have proof. It ends tonight. The room shattered into silent. Staggered back, one hand gripping the edge of the fireplace for balance. His glasses slipped slightly on his nose. She wasn't supposed to, he whispered. Pooh's eyes narrowed. She trusted you. She told you her plans, and you, Moneiru, begged her not to publish. But when she refused, I didn't kill her, Edwin burst out. No, Poirot said softly, but you snuck in too. The study, you swapped thievery. You soaked the pages with your homemade Lehman ink solution. You wrote your own replacement entries, meaningless, stand safe, and then you hid the real page in the lining. You couldn't bear to destroy it completely. Pooh stepped forward, but you stole her truth. Edwin sank into a chair, his face blank, his hands limp. I didn't think it would kill her. I just wanted it to stop. Pooh nodded. The act was not murder by law, but it was murder offentant. She died knowing she had been silenced. A quiet stillness fell over the room. Judith looked away. Miles wiped his eyes. Cray exhaled like a man disarmed. Pooh turned once more to the page in his hands. Justice, he said softly. Semetimus Combs. Too late, but the truth, Mimi. The truth never vanishes. Not truly, not even disappearing ink. Chapter 10. The reveal in the light of morning. Theft flowing. Morning broke with pale light, stretching across the east lawns of Hawthorne Manor. The storm that had gripped the countryside for days had finally retreated. In its wake, comestiveness, not peace exactly, but the quiet that follows after some irrevocal has occurred. The guests, now stripped of pretenses, gathered in the drawing room once more at Poirot's request. No longer was it a literary retreat. No longer a gathering of minds and egos. It was now a tribunal. Poirot stood at the window, arms folded behind his back, looking out at the gardens, as though reading them like a page. He turned slowly. "Mies," he said gently. "You are all writers. In your way, editors, scientists, journalists, storytellers. Each of you understands the power of the written word. It can build legacies or destroy them. But Lady Frances understood one thing more than all of you. The truth once written cannot be unwritten." He walked toward the desk, now cleared, save for a single sheet of paper, the recovered page from the real diary found, stitched into the lining of the forged one. "I told you there was a sentence that killed, but it was not the sentence that struck her. Down it was the knowledge of betrayal." Poirot's gazeful on Edwin Stroud, who sat with hunched shoulders, his hands gripping the edges of the armchair, as if holding on to the last threads of his dignity. "You forged letters in her late husband's name. Letters sent to the Prime Minister during the war to falsely discredit his political rivals. It gave you power, a new position, and for years you thought it forgotten. But Lady Frances remembered. She found your drafts, the ink you had hidden the names. You thought lost in bureaucracy." Edwin's voice was hollow. "He asked her to stop you, begged her, pleaded, even threatened her, did you not? But Lady Frances had already written the truth. She told you she would publish it. She had already left instructions with her solicitor to amend her will to ensure the story would be released. Chaldine, things happened to her." Poirot turned to Judith Peel. "You feared being confronted. Same will you confronted," Lady Frances argued. "But in the end, you're treated. You feared exposure, but not enough to kill you. Are guilty of ego perhaps, but not of violence." Judith exhaled shakily. Poirot now looked 2 miles. Dalrymple, who avoided his gaze. "You tampered with the ink. Yes, you replaced it in fear, not of harm, but humiliation. You thought your name would be ruined if she exposed your academic dishonesty. You never meant her harm, but you attempted to erase her words. Stew is a kind of death." Finally, Poirot faced Major Cray and you. "Monsieur, you were prepared to do violence a bit. You didn't. Your anger was too large, your sense of self too inflated." Lady Frances saw through it. "You are a man who builds a world on false courage, and Winch dismantled it." You fell silent. Cray said nothing. Poirot returned, tough, center of the room, and laid the recovered page upon the desk. "This is the truth." She left behind a single page. A single sentence, enough to ruin a Menina, to make him act Poole looked once more at Edwin. "You did not murder her with a weapon. You murdered her with silence. You stole her words, you replaced them with blankness, but the act, MC, was one of cowardice, not cleverness." Edwin's eyes filled with tears. I only wanted to stop the destruction she was not destroying." Sighed. She was revealing there is a difference. A long pause followed. Even the manner seemed to exhale. Pooh reached for his notebook and closed it with precision. "The authorities will take it from here. What remains now is not mine to decide." He stepped toward the door, pausing only once more to say, "Lady Frances Langford died with a pen in her hand and fire in her heart, but the truth will always find a way to rise, even from ash, even from ink that vanished silver knit." And with that, Hercule Poirot left Hawthorne Manor, his hat placed precisely his, cane tapping softly on the stone in his little gray cells. Once again, at Reese chapter 11, the reflection that never lied. 3 days after Hercule Poirot left Hawthorne Manor, the quiet returned, the kind that doesn't comfort, but lingers like the scent of something burned. The house wasn't no longer filled with raised voices, speculation, or the thunder of secrets cracking under pressure, but his silence was no longer serene. Inspector Grievous remained behind to tidy up what Poole had so neatly unraveled. Edwin Stroud was taken into custody, not for murder, but for obstruction of justice, forgery, and tampering with the potential death scene. His publishing career, naturally, was over. Newspapers had yet to learn the truth, but when they did, they would write headlines. He could noted it. Judith Peel left in the middle of the night. She neither said goodbye nor lived. A note, she would some guest write. A column about the retreat, vague, cutting a fiction that wore the mask of honesty. But even Judith, it seemed, had lost. Hardest for performance, Miles Dalrymple remained behind a day longer. Quiet like collecting his notebooks, burning a few, and packing the rest, with careful regret he offered. No defense, no appeal, the shame of exposure had done enough when departed. He took the early train, unnoticed like a man exiting his ounce story major. Gray, he stayed the longest. The papers found him 3 days later sitting, alone in the Manor's once grand ballroom, where dusk now danced with the morning light. He did not deny anything, only muttered that his metals had always felt heavier than they looked. And as for Lydia, the maid, she remained. The house was in her blood. She polished the desk where Lady Frances had dyed arranged flowers that no longer brought color, and stood before the mirror that had watched it all happen, because that mirror above this had never been removed. Dob Poirot, back in his London flat, stood with a cube of warm chocolate in hand, reading a telegram Inspector Greaves had sent that morning. Final report filed. Edwin confessed to tampering with diary and sending threats. No evidence of physical contact with victim. Time of death consistent with stress-induced cardiac arrest. All suspects cleared of direct murder charges. Lady Frances buried. With full ceremony, solicitor released surviving pages to press case. Closet Riggards Greaves. Poirot read it once, then twice. Then he placed it on the side table next to a neatly folded pocket square. He stared for a moment at the small, framed photograph that sat Basidia's reading chair, a photo of a mirror taken by Greaves at Poirot's request. In its reflection, Lady Frances Langford could be seen pen in hand, turning slightly surprised, and behind her, the door opened. Pooh smiled faintly. Helready knew who had entered, but the mirror, he believed, had given the story its final witness. He spoke softly to the empty room. One sees clearly only when one stops. Looking for Elise. Lady Frances Langford's final sentence did not vanish. It was read, feared, hidden, but it lived on, and in the end, the truth stood, as it always does, quiet, patient, and unshakably. Whole Chapter 12. The funeral with an empty guest book. The funeral of Lady Frances Langford was held on a gray Tuesday beneath a sky that refused to break. Open but promised rain. All the same, the stone chapel in the village of Barkham Hollow stood among yews that had grown twisted and watchful with age. Much like the woman now buried beneath them, only a handful of Moors attended. There was no reading of her published works, no floral tribute bearing the covers of her memoirs. The villagers, those who had unsecreted her, with curt nods at the market, stood at the edges, uncertain whether to mourn or simply witness. A few whispered she had been a woman of secrets. Others said she had loved her roses, but not her neighbors. At the front pew sat Lydia, the maid, dressed in the same black coat she'd worn every winter for a decade, her gloved hands clutching a damp handkerchief. She cried, not because of obligation, but because of familiarity. For all her flaws, Lady Frances had seen her, spoken to her, trusted her. The seat beside Lydia remained empty. No sign of Judith Peel, no Miles Dalrymple. Major Cray had sent flowers without a card, and Edwin Stroud, though legally permitted to attend, had not been seen since the morning after. Poirot's revelations man, who once handled Lady Frances's words, had vanished, unable to face Orphanel chapter. The guest book laid open on the small stone table near Thechapel's entrance fluttered lightly in the breeze. By the end of the service, it held only 2 signatures. Lydia Hargrave H. Poirot. After the funeral, Poirot stood silently at the grave, hands folded over the handle of his cane. He said nothing. There was no dramatic epilogue, no speech, just a faint nod. Inspector Greaves approached quietly. She deserved more, he said. Poirot glanced at him. She was not always kind, not always just, but she was brave, and her truth frightened those who pretended to be untouchable. Greaves looked at the ground Stroud. A stand trial, public opinion will shred what's left of him and others. They'll live with what they almost became. Poirot nodded. That is punishment enough. Greaves hesitated. Do you ever grow tired of finding the truth? Poirot looked skyward. The clouds remained heavy and unyielding. It is not the truth. That tires me, mon ami, he said. It is how willingly men run from it, and how easily they try to erase it. He left the chapel before the others. Hisselhuet, shrinking against the hill's edge, framed by gray light and 1,000 Dunsbone thoughts, he did not look back, and behind him, the pages of a vanished diary, the real ones, now locked in a solicitor's vault, would someday be published under the title, The Ink That Vanished Overnight. Ali Finetted. In the end, Lady Frances Langford wrote her story. And though the ink for death words endured, Chapter 13, the publisher, Horfist, to publish, 10 days after the funeral of Lady Frances Langford, a courier delivered a sealed brown envelope to Hercule Poirot's apartment in London. The handwriting was immaculate, unmistakable, slanted in a dignified hand, the sort used by solicitors who understood both discretion and legacy. Inside was a short letter in a legal manuscript, bound and twined. The letter from Mr. Thomas Hargrave, Lady Frances' solicitor, was brief, Monsieur Poirot, as per Lady Langford's final instructions. Enclosed, you will find the unpublished draft of her final manuscript, completed days before her death. She requested that it be sent to you for safekeeping should any attempt made to suppress or rewrite its content. I have honored her request. Yours sincerely, Thihar Grove. Poirot read the letter twice, then untied the string on the manuscript. The title page bore the name, The Ink That Vanished Overnight, a private exposure by Lady Frances Langford. He turned the first page and began reading, and very quickly he understood. That same afternoon, Poirot and J. a meeting at Finch and Braxton Publishing. Quiet, oak-paneled office discreetly on a side street of Holborn. It was there that he met Mr. Langley Price, the senior partner, a pallid, sharp-eyed man who spoke in half-sentences and tapped his fountain pen when agitated. You're here regarding the Langford manuscript, Price said flatly. Poirot smiled. I am. You were her original publisher, were you not? Yes. Her first 3 memoirs, we had an agreement, but she went rogue with this last one, refused. Editorial oversight, said it. Wash her voice, unfiltered. We declined to publish. You refused, Pooh said, because the manuscript names individuals, names you recognize, names tied to your firm. Price's face didn't move. She made dangerous accusations. If published, they damage reputations, ruin families. Poirot nodded. And the truth, we don't publish Leon, Miss Poirot, especially not posthumous revenge. Poirot leaned forward. Then let me ask you something simple. Did you know Edwin Stroud had been forging letters under the Langford name for political gain prices? Fingers froze on his pen. Poirot continued, his voice silk over steel. Did you know those forgeries were used to secure contracts, even a government grant, to your firm? Silence. Poirot reached into his coat and produced the notarized manuscript. Lady Frances names Edwin Stroud, but she also names you Mr. Price, includes evidence, timelines, signatures, prices, complexion. Went Gray suggest. Harrow said that you do not attempt to bury this one because you hold the only copy and die. Unlike Edwin, do not vanish into shadow. I, Illumina Tepersis. Jaw clenched. You're threatening me. Poirot smiled. No, Missy, I am offering you a second chance to do the right thing, a rare gift in publishing. That evening, Poirot toned home to find a letter waiting at his door, this time unsigned, written in cheap ballpoint. Ink on coarse paper. It read, she ruined lives, she meddled. Perhaps we all wanted her gone, but none of us did it. She died because she couldn't let things lie. She always had to be the one who knew more. There's no wonder in what she did, only vanity. Poole read it once, then folded it carefully. Vanity, yes, but also conviction. Lady Frances Langford may have played God with other people's secrets, But she had never lied, and in the end, the truth she left behind had set not just others free but herself. A week later, Finch and Braxton announced a surprise release, The Ink That Vanished Overnight, the final writings of Lady Frances Langford, unedited and unforgiving. The book sold out. Within days, some names were redacted, others were not. The truth had emerged in the footnotes, discreet but impossible to miss, was the dedication to the man who kept my truth alive. HP Chapter 14, the manuscript that outlived its author. Hercule Poirot had always said that the truth was more enduring than stone words. Sent to paper had a way of outliving even the most fortified walls, and now sitting in his warm apartment on a cool spring evening, he held a copy of Lady Frances Langford's last manuscript free, printed neatly bound to pages, unblemished by time or tampering. He turned the pages, slowly absorbing not just the words, but the spaces between them. For, in the hesitations, the pause and the rhythm of the text, Pugh could feel the presence of the woman herself, determined, exacting, unyielding. Truth she had left behind was not a single explosive revelation. Rather, it was a steady unraveling of deceit, like a master weaver pulling threads from a once perfect tapestry until the whole image collapsed under its own lies. But there was one name, one detail that even Pooh hadn't expected. The final chapter of Lady Frances's manuscript contained not just a list of names, but a sequence of letters carefully arranged, hinting at Asgard's family trust. She had written about a document hidden in a London vault, a record that not only implicated Edwin Stroud and Mr. Langley Price, but also a name tied to the very foundation of the Langford estate, Arthur Tresham, her late husband's estranged brother. This revelation did not appear in the newspaper serialization or the early proofs provided to Finch and Braxton. It was a carefully buried clue, visible only in the first print run, a subtle nod that Lady Frances had planned not just for her own legacy, but for those who might someday come looking for her motives. Poirot closed the book and leaned back in his chair. There was more to this story than scandal, mon ami, he murmured to himself. It is a key to something larger. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. 2 days later, Poole stood before the private vaults of Tremont Co., an old London firm known for handling only the most sensitive estates. The clerk who brought the small leather case to him was professional, but curious. It wasn't the very day that a retired Belgian detective with a reputation for untangling impossible mysteries came to retrieve something so mundane as a box of documents. But what Poirot found inside was far from mundane. The documents were ledger's accounts going back decades. Hidden among them was a single envelope, unopened, addressed in the unmistakable handwriting of Arthur Tresham. The date, 1922, the year of his sudden and unexplained disappearance. Poole opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet bearing an elegant but direct message to whom averted Scovers. This know that my brother's wealth was not built. Honestly, the estate is not ours. The land was taken by deception, and I was the one who helped forge the papers. I cannot live with what I have done. I leave these records as proof. Do what you will with them, but know that the Langford name carries a stain I can never remove. I am truly sorry, Arthur Tresham. Poole returned to his apartment with the envelope and ledger in hand. He sat at his small dining table, arranging the pieces like a puzzle. It was, in many ways, exactly what he expected. Lady Frances Langford had not just uncovered her husband's affairs and Edwin Stroud's forgeries. She had reached further back into the very foundation of Langford fortune and found it built on lies. Her final manuscript had arrived. Her, yes, but more importantly, it had done what she could not in life expose, a truth so deeply buried that even the family itself had forgotten it. Pooh smiled faintly. He poured himself a cup of his favorite tea and and sat quietly letting the weight of her discovery settle over him. She was a formidable woman, he said softly, and in the end, she did what even I could not. She made the past confess. Chapter 15. The family that couldn't forget Arthur. Feversham's confession cast a long shadow for her. The Langford name, and though the public would never see it, the family could never escape it. With the release of Lady Frances's manuscript, the Langford estate was thrust into a spotlight it had long avoided. Though Edwin Stroud faced his downfall in public, the greater scandal lay behind closed doors, where the surviving Langfords wrestled with a legacy built on deception. Poirot had no personal interest in the Langford fortune or its tarnished reputation. His work was done, his curiosity satisfied, and yet, as he read through the Treeham documents late one evening, he noticed a peculiar, tailless arise of letters written to a woman named Margaret Whittam, an old acquaintance of Lady Frances. The letter suggested that Margaret had known about the Forgettys long before Arthur's confession. More intriguingly, they hinted that she had helped Lady Frances uncover them, that what women, it seemed, had shared. A bond not of friendship, but of mutual determination, each driven to unravel the Langford family's carefully woven web. Margaret Whittam lived quietly in a modest flat near Hyde Park. She was a widow of modest means, her days spent tending her small balcony garden and sipping tea with her sister. When Poirot arrived, she greeted him with a mix of surprise and apprehension. "You've come about, Frances, haven't you?" she said. Without preamble, I wondered if anyone would pull pal slightly you were close with. Lady Frances, not close, Margaret said, but connected. She reached out to home some years ago. She'd found old letters from Arthur Letters. I had written to him when we were young. Frances knew something was wrong, something her husband had never told her, and you helped her. Margaret nodded slowly. I didn't want to it. At first, I thought it would do no good to dig up old sins, but Frances, she had a way of asking questions that made it impossible to stay silent. So I told her everything I knew about. The forged deeds, Poirot asked. Yes, Arthur came to me when it all began, confessed his part in it, told me he'd signed documents he knew were false. He wanted to set things right, but he was too afraid. The family, the estate, the name, it was all too much for him. Why did he never confess to Lady Frances herself? Margaret hesitated because he knew her husband would destroy him. Arthur loved his brother, but he also feared him and Frances. Think he feared her judgment most of all. Poole left Margaret's flat with a clearer understanding of Lady Frances's crusade. Her need to uncover truth had been as personal as it was moral. She had known for years that her family's wealth was tainted. She had lived with the weight of that knowledge, and when she finally acted, it was no town of vengeance, but out of a desire to reclaim something lost: integrity, back at his apartment. Poirot reviewed the final entries of Lady Frances's manuscript. Her words were measured, deliberate, unflinching. She wrote not just of her discovery, but of her resolve to share it with the world. Scandal she exposed would not undo the harm done, but it would force the family and all who benefited from their fortune to confront their past. In a small notebook Poirot made a note to himself. Lady Frances did not forget, neither can the Langfords. The past is never truly past. It waits patient until someone dares to remember. Chapter 16. The legacy left behind the Langford estate, unso considered, a symbol of wealth and prominence, now stood as a reminder of the fragile foundation on which reputations are built, though the wider public remained unaware of Arthur Tresham's confession. Lady Frances' final manuscript cast long shadows within literary circles. It was whispered about. In tones of hushed fascination, critics debated its honest narrators, dissected its every line, and in the halls of Finch and Braxton, where it went, Stroud's name was now only muttered as a cautionary tale. The manuscript became a kind, often intentional legend, but the true legacy wasn't in book sales or literary gossip. It lay in the choices made by those left behind. Judith Peel Once the loudest voice of the manor had fallen silent, her editorials stopped her columns. Ceased, some speculated she was writing a memoir of her own, but when her name reappeared months later, it wasn't on the pages of a major publication. Instead, it was on the spine of a small, self-published volume, Quietest Room Essays on Truth, Power, and Betrayal. The book was understate-free of scandalous names, and deeply personal critics noted its raw honesty, a surprising departure from her earlier, more biting work for Judith Itzy Meth. Langford affair had been a turning point. She no longer sought to expose others, she sought to understand herself. Miles Dahl Remprimple, once the timid chemist who had tried to alter the evidence, disappeared from public life altogether. It was said he returned to the countryside, where he took up teaching at a small college. In his lectures, he spoke not of academic fraud or professional rivalry, but of theme pretense, of precision, integrity, and the courage to admit mistakes. Those who attended his classes described him as quiet, thoughtful, and unusually patient, while his reputation as a chemist never recovered. His quiet dedication to his students spoke of Eamon, who had learned to rebuild his life on smaller, steadier foundations. Major Bernard Craig, the blustering soldier whose memoirs had once been a best laureate from public view entirely, he left. No more manuscripts made, no more appearances at literary festivals. Instead, he was seen tending the gardens of a small village house, planting flowers that bloomed in bold, unapologetic colors. Neighbors whispered he still carried himself with the pride of an officer, but that he never spoke of the war again. Craig's legacy, it seemed, became the quiet beauty cultivated in his own backyard. As for Edwin Stroud, his name was etched into publishing history as a cautionary tale. He was not charged with murder, but this scandal of forgery, tampering, and betrayal ended his career. His name vanished from the mastheads, and those who once praised his editorial instincts now refused to speak of him at all. He lived out his days in a modest flat, his shelves empty of the books he once shaped for Stroud. The legacy left behind was one of silence, not the silence he imposed, but the silence that followed him. And what of the Langford estate itself? Lydia, the faithful maid, remained its caretaker. For a time, the house stood largely empty, its halls no longer echoing with the voices of writers and critics. The gardens grew wilder, the ivy thicker, though no new literary gatherings were held there. The Langford estate became something else, a quiet retreat for those seeking solitude, a place where the air carried the weight of history and the whisper of truths. Finally spoken Poirot, reading about these changes from the comfort of his London apartment, smiled faintly. Legacies, he mused, are not in the grand gestures or the loud proclamations. They are in the quiet adjustments, the small acts of atonement, the paths chosen when the dust settles. Lady Frances Langford's God's legacy was not in the words she wrote, but in what those words inspired. The truth may sting, but it also heals. He closed the final page of the last printed edition of Lady Frances' manuscript and placed it carefully on his bookshelf alongside the case notes there. It sat not as a trophy, but as a reminder for the man who sought truth in every corner. It was proof that even in the murky depths of deception, there remained the possibility of clarity. Chapter 17, the name that endured months after the publication of Lady Frances Langford's manuscript. The furor surrounding her revelations began to fade. The literary world moved on to its next scandal. Readers turned their attention to new stories, and the Langford name, once synonymous with wealth and authority, now rested quietly at history's shadows, but not entirely forgotten. Lady Frances had never sought fame, but her name became something else entirely. A symbol among writers, her posthumous book became a cautionary tale about the cost of truth in academic circles. Her methods were studied, her purpose referenced, and for those who knew her, truly knew her, the name Langford Beckham, a reminder of resilience, determination, and the refusal to bezelance. It began subtly. A graduate student at Oxford, wrote a thesis on theoretical implications of posthumous publications using Lady Frances's manuscript as a cornerstone. A journalist, spurred by her work, began a series of investigative articles on modern aesthetical trees, dedicating the first piece to Langford's courageous pursuit of Anistia, small but respected literary prize, renamed one of its categories in her honor, the Langford Prize for Unflinching Memoirs. And yet beyond the public accolades, it was the private recollections that truly gave her name its enduring strength. Lydia, the maid who had served Lady Frances 4 years, took it upon herself to compile a small handwritten volume of her own memories of Lady Frances. It was not a salacious tale all instead. It contained simple, heartfelt anecdotes. How Frances used to live notes for the staff on holidays. How she insisted on writing with her favorite fountain pen, even when it leaked. How she always kept a jar of wild flowers on her desk. The volume, unpolished and unassuming, found its way into local bookshops and slowly spread. Readers were charmed by the portrait of a woman who had not been perfect, but had been profoundly human. Meanwhile, the Langford estate, though no longer bustling with writers and critics, found a new purpose. The Langford Literary Trust, funded by the modest royalties from Lady Frances's final book, began offering small grants to emerging writers whose work focused on themes of justice, transparency, and integrity. The trust operated quietly, without fervor, and each grant recipient received a handwritten note bearing the simple phrase, "In the name of truth, with gratitude to Lady Frances Langford," perorating about these developments in the literary journals. He still received, found himself quietly pleased. The case had been solved, the culprits identified, but the true mystery, the meaning behind it all, continued to unfold. One morning, while taking his customary tisane, Poirot received a letter from a young writer named Anna Mortimer, the most recent recipient of the Langford Literary Trust grant. "Dear Mr. Poirot, though we have never met, I feel I owe you a debt of gratitude. Without your dedication to uncovering the truth about Lady Frances's final days, her story and her name might have faded into obscurity. Instead, her courage continues to inspire. It is because of her, and in no small part because of you, that I am able to tell my own story now. Thank you, yours sincerely, Anna Mortimer." Poirot smiled. Ash set the letter down. He folded his hands neatly over the tabletop and reflected a name he murmured is not carved in stone or etched in ink. It is scared forward by those who remember, and sometimes it is made eternal, not by a hat one leaves behind, but by what one inspires in other chapter. 18. The house that became a legacy, the Langford estate, stood silent now, but it was not forgotten. Its halls no longer rang with the voices of visiting authors or the clatter of the cups during literary retreats. Instead, it carried a quieter presence, living monument to Lady Frances Langford's relentless pursuit of truth. Lydia, still tending the house as its caretaker, had slowly transformed it from a private manor into something more meaningful of her. Time word spread that the estate was not entirely closed to the outside world. Writers who sought inspiration in its serene gardens or the quiet of its library began to visit under special arrangements. The Langford estate had become a refuge for those who needed space to think, to create, and perhaps to remember. One spring morning, a group of young writers arrived. They were Thelatis recipients of the Langford Literary Trust's grant. A diverse group from all corners of the literary world. Some were poets, others journalists, still others novelists at the start of promising careers. They came not to socialize, but to work to find clarity within the stillness that Hawthorne Manor. Nalford, Lydia greeted them with her usual quiet grace, though she was never one to boast off her years with. Lady Frances, she found herself answering their polite question sharing. Small personal stories about her late mistress. She spoke of the rose garden that Frances had insisted pretended even during the harshest winters, of the narrow desk where she had written long into the night, and of the mirror in the study, the one that had seen everything and yet reflected only the truth. These stories, told simply and without embellishment, began to spread. Langford Estate gained a reputation as a place where writing became more than just a craft. It became an act of preservation, of integrity, of honoring the legacy of a woman who had fought to ensure that words mattered. When Lydia retired a year later, the Langford Estate was entrusted to the Langford Literary Trust itself. A small staff was appointed to maintain the house, care for the grounds, and continue its tradition as a sanctuary for writers' estate. Was no longer a private manor. It had become a living tribute, a place where truth was not only remembered, but nurtured. And so Hawthorne Manor found a new life. Its grand halls, once filled with the weight of secrecy, carried the hum of creativity. Its gardens bloomed brighter than ever, each flower a quiet acknowledgement that beauty and truth could flourish together estate-like. Lady Frances herself had become more than a name or a legacy. It had become a place where words lived, where stories grew, and where the true thoughts uncovered was never allowed to fade. Chapter 19: The Return to Hawthorne Manor. 3 years after the publication of Lady Frances Langford's final manuscript, Hercule Poirot found himself once again on the winding country road to Hawthorne Manor. It was a bright morning in early summer, and the air carried the faint scent of cut grass and distant lavenders. Manor's ivy-covered turrets came into view over the crest of a hill, standing firm against the horizon, as though waiting for him. Poirot had not intended to return. When he left after solving the case, he believed his work at Hawthorne Manor was finished. But life, as Poirot often reflected, had a way of calling one back to unfinished business. This time, he had not been summoned by tragedy or suspicion. Instead, it was an invitation, a formal request from the Langford Literary Trust. They had written to him months earlier, expressing their gratitude for the role he had played in preserving Lady Frances's legacy. The Trust now wished to honor her by naming the state's newly established library after her, the Lady Frances Langford Memorial Library. They wanted Poirot to attend the unveiling and deliver a few words to mark the occasion. When Poirot arrived, he found the house, its transforming, once somber atmosphere had been replaced with quiet energy. Riders moved freely through the halls, notebooks in hand. The gardens were vibrant, their pathways lined with young volunteers, pruning hedges and planting seasonal blooms. The oppressive silence that once hung over the manor had given way to the soft hum of life. Lydia, now retired, had been replaced by a team of staff who maintained the estate with care and pride. The Trust's directors greeted Poirot warmly, showing him through the newly refurbished library, a grand room that once served as the manor's formal dining hall. It now housed rows of shelves filled with books by authors who had stayed at the estate over the past 3 years, as well as rare editions of Lady Frances's own work set. The center of the room, a small glass display case, held the first edition of her final manuscript, open to the first page, alongside a handwritten note from Poirot himself. The truth, though it may be hidden, never disappears. It waits patiently, like ink that fades, until someone with the courage to reveal it picks up deep in Poirot. The unveiling ceremony was modest but meaningful. Poirot stood before Agatha of writers, Caleb, Trust members, and a few locals who had been invited to celebrate the occasion. He spoke briefly, his words measured and sincere. Lady Frances Langford was many things. Her Bacon, a woman of sharp wit, keen observation, and unwavering determination, but above all, she was a woman who believed in the power of the written word. She understood that stories can change the world, but only if they are honest. He paused, looking out at Ephesus. Before him, the library we dedicate today is not merely a collection of books. It is a testament to the courage it takes to tell the truth, even when it is difficult, and it is a reminder that words, once written, can outlive us all. The applause that followed was warm, heartfelt, and carried through the open windows into the gardens beyond. Later, as Poirot strolled through those very gardens, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The manor no longer held the weight of secrets. Instead, it had become a place of creation, of inspiration, and of truth. Fair Poirot, the return to Hawthorne. Manor was not merely a journey back to where a mystery had been solved. It was a return to the heart of what he had always believed, that the truth once revealed never truly vanishes. It endures, it grows, and it carries us forward. Chapter 20. The Truth That Tenders. As Hercule Poirot prepared to leave Hawthorne Manor for what he felt certain would be the last time, he paused in the grand entrance hall. The air was still, and the sunlight streaming through the tall windows cast long golden beams across the polished floor. The manor once a stage for secrets now radiated a calm honesty. It had found its purpose, its peace. A member of the Langford Literary Trust approached him with a parting gift, a leather-bound fountain of Lady Frances Langford's collected works. Poirot accepted it with a gracious nod and turned it over in his hands. The spine was embossed with gold lettering, her name shining brightly beneath his fingertips. Outside, their gardens were alive with the murmur of writers exchanging ideas and pages. Cuirasses, once tended by Lady Frances herself, bloomed in vivid shades of redanned white. Poirot took a moment to admire them, marveling at how something so delicate could thrive in a place once steeped in tension. It reminded him of the truth itself. Resilient, enduring, Andy were capable of renewal. A young writer passing by hesitated, then approached. Himshly, Mia Poirot, she began. Do you think Lady Frances ever doubted what she was doing, ever worried she might be wrong? Poirot smiled gently. Every great truth carries with it the weight of doubt. My dear Lady Frances knew that her revelations would not be welcomed by all. She knew the cost, but in the end, she chose to write them, not because she was certain of how the world would respond, but because she was certain they must be written for a young writer. Nodded thoughtfully. So she was. Brave. Poirot tipped his hat. Brave and perhaps stubborn. But above all, she believed in the enduring power of the written word. And that is courage of the finest kind. As the car arrived to take him back to London, Poirot took one last look at Hawthorne Manor, the house's gardens, the library now bearing Lady Frances's name. All stood as silent witnesses to a truth that had outlived its author. Back in his quiet apartment in London, Poirot placed the leather-bound volume on his bookshelf beside the case files that chronicled the mystery. He sat for a moment, hands resting on the armrests of his chair as the city's hum drifted in through the window. His work here was done, but the truth, the Lagusa Scythe, Lady Frances Langford, would continue to shape lives, inspire writers, and your mind, all who encountered it, of the courage it takes to let the truth be known in the end. Poirot murmured to himself. It is not the ink that vanishes, but the lies. The truth remains steady as hand that first wrote.